Welcome back to Unboxing Logistics. I'm your host, Lori Boyer of Easy Post, and you are in for a treat today. We are going to be talking on today's show with the great Nate Skiver all about costs, carriers, the Chinese. I got like triple C's going on here for us to be talking about all of the latest trends coming into 2025 around these topics. And I brought in one of the great educators, really a great person in the space here of logistics and supply chain, Nate Skiver. Can you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience who might not know you?
Absolutely. I appreciate the amazing introduction, Lori. But my name is Nate Skiver. I'm founder of LPF Spend Management, which essentially means I'm an independent consultant. I am a 20 plus year parcel nerd that about 5 years ago decided to move into consulting after 17 years in retail. So I help package shippers ship smarter and reduce cost. I also help package carriers, not UPS and FedEx. They don't need my help. Compete in the marketplace. So I've been doing that for the past 5 years. And have really valued the opportunity to work with so many different companies and help them optimize their parcel programs.
That's fantastic. Unboxing Logistics community, you're basically getting like free consulting care today. So from the great Nate. So get ready, buckle up. It's going to be really fun. But before we get started, one of the things we've been doing that I have just absolutely loved this season is I've been asking my guests to share a person in the industry that they really admire, or even a role in the industry that they really admire. This industry is so full of connections, and the importance of relationships is huge. And I've really been interested to hear about who people admire and who have been great mentors. So Nate, do you have somebody you can share with us?
I do, and I'll say mine isn't directly parcel necessarily, but a lot of people will know this one. Rick Watson. Rick is a really dynamic presence in the e-commerce industry. A veteran of that industry with several companies, and he's been consulting on his own for a little bit longer than I have. And so early on in my consulting career, I started to follow Rick. I've chatted with Rick, and so really admire the work that he does, the candor that he has, that he brings to all of his, be it content or also has his own podcast. So really, value the work that Rick does.
Absolutely. That's amazing. And I just want to say I've really enjoyed as I've heard people share about mentors and examples that they've had in the industry. It's just really reminded me, for all of you out there listening, there are so many opportunities. If there's a job role you're interested in, if there's, if you're wanting to pivot in your career a little bit, kind of like Nate did in becoming a consultant, look for those people that you admire and reach out to them. So often, if you all you want to do is say, I'd love to have a conversation with you about how you're making this work, or, do you have tips for me? So many people in this industry are just fantastic about that. So I love that. Thank you. Shout out to Rick. That's awesome. Okay, another cool thing we've been doing. Nate, I know you can't go like even 5 steps in this industry without hearing about AI, hearing about tech. It's a big thing everyone's talking about everywhere. But when it comes to some things like ChatGPT, it's often, as we've used it more and more, it's easy to see sometimes, it's so good at kind of starting a foundation. It maybe gives you some good points, but sometimes it's a little bit missing. And sometimes it's right on. So the best way to kind of fact check it is with our experts here. Make sure, see what their take is on what it says. So I have asked ChatGPT, what trends will we see between the big name carriers and the smaller kind of regional or more alternative carriers in the next 5 years? What it anticipates seeing kind of the trends here. So I'm going to read these to you, Nate, and we'll get kind of your feedback. See if you think it's missing anything. See if you think it's on. So first, its number one thing it said was it believes we'll see collaboration between them over competition. Okay, so you can think about that. Number two, we will see increased diversification by shippers. So increasing diversification. And 3, adoption of tech and data sharing between the big carriers and the smaller carriers. Okay, so gut check reaction first. Collaboration over competition, increased diversification. That one seems like kind of pretty fairly is already happening, but also adoption of sharing of technology and data.
Wow. So the collaboration, if we're talking, if I understood this correctly, collaboration with each other,
Yes. It
that
says
one,
major carriers will
hmm,
increasingly lean on regional players to meet their customers' expectations.
if that's within the
Yeah,
5 year horizon, I think that is on the back end of that.
that's what I thought.
Because right now it doesn't appear that way, very much at all. There's really intense competition right now.
Yeah.
Um, Even if you, I mean, if you throw the USPS in there, I mean, they're a very large, player in the industry. They are taking the approach of, hey, we've got this. We're going to do it on our own. So,
Mm-hmm.
which is a massive change from what they've done. So,
Yeah.
so I don't know about that one. I think
Yeah.
if it happens, it is at the end of that 5 years.
What about consolidation? Do you see consolidation at all? Like, the purchasing of some of these smaller regional carriers by the big ones?
On a really small scale, possibly. I think that's what I would expect. Like, n not necessarily a, just to make this up, I'm not saying this would ever happen,
Yeah.
FedEx acquiring on track or something
Yeah.
like that. I don't think that is what we see. And we maybe can talk about a more organic consolidation of some providers not being in the market anymore. That I think is much more likely in the short
Yeah.
term.
I could see that. Okay. Diversification by shippers.
That one I would agree with.
Me too.
It's been like a building trend, and it's not a one size fits all. Not every shipper has to diversify or anything like that. But I think all of the things that go into that, available options from just a delivery provider standpoint, technology, and then inventory getting closer to the customer enables a lot of those things also. So I think that will continue. So I would agree with that one.
Okay. And then the last one, this is one that I was really hesitant on, that we would see more adoption of technology and data sharing between the large carriers and the small ones. Again, I think I'm with you. Like, it feels very competitive right now and everybody's protecting stuff. So it's hard to see, but
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a use case, not in a literal like partnership as far as delivery services goes. I'm trying to think of how that might work. I can't think of anything right now, so I'm not sure exactly where that one's directed, but
ChatGPT must think that it has great hopes that we're very collaborative and helpful in working together. More than I think we are.
agreed. I mean, maybe that might be in those providers, I mean, regardless of who they are, their best interest, but I don't think it's happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so what would be your overall grade, A to F? What would you give it?
Uh, I don't know, maybe a C plus.
Yeah, I was thinking in the C range as well. Anything that you would say that it missed, that you would see as a trend coming down in the relationship there?
Of UPS and FedEx diversifying their businesses where package
Mm,
delivery might
mm-hmm.
still be the majority of revenue, but not what it is today. So other
Yeah.
types of services to where they aren't dependent upon delivery as much as they are, because that I think over time becomes more commoditized.
Okay. Okay. Do you think that they'll focus more on some of those like kind of niche markets? Or how will they handle those?
Somewhat or adjacent, whether it's kind of market segments or capabilities that maybe they already offer, but expanding those. I mean, UPS is focused on healthcare, so I just think kind of areas that are adjacent, maybe even current service offerings that they build out uh, to to diversify their revenue a bit.
Okay. Perfect. Love it. Okay. So what do you see kind of as the trends as we're going into 2025? What are sort of the most significant things that you anticipate for shippers and for the carriers as well? As we move into kind of an uncertain year, we've got, political changes and we've got global conflict and all kinds of potential disruptions. But what are your predictions? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think a fair amount of some of the things that have happened in 24 will either continue or maybe evolve to an extent in 25. I mean, one of the things is even though the market, I guess just package volume, if you want to kind of size the market, isn't really growing or changing too significantly, there's a lot of change happening in the market with different providers either entering the market, trying to expand, gain a foothold. FedEx continues, and UPS continues to make pricing more complex. So that's,
Mm-hmm.
just something that the pace of change on that front also is very, very difficult, to keep up with. And so I think that along with, the complexity of that comes with all of the choices in the market. So it's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think that continues to be something that shippers have to really stay on top of and stay on top of the market, understand where it's headed from a pricing standpoint, and do their best to prepare for it. Um, I think uncertain, I think you mentioned that word. There is uncertainty around this group of alternative carriers. Some of them may not exist. Some of them may, persist and hopefully, survive and thrive. But it's really something again that a shipper has to investigate, explore, to really understand and take advantage of. Last two things, if that wasn't enough, I think are two other players in the market that one has had an impact for a while, the USPS. Um, they've been changing their network for quite a long time, so that's still in process. And they are being much more intentional with their strategy around their package services. Uh, to the, I guess they've also really kind of taken hold of that volume in business, perhaps at the expense of some of their partners. And so that has created some uncertainty with pricing,
Mm-hmm.
particularly lightweight packages. That's not We're not done with that. That's in process right now. And so I think particularly first half of the year is where that might show up more in the market. Um, Last thing, Amazon. So Amazon shipping
Yeah.
been kind of hanging out there for a while, not really, at least publicly, making much of an impact. From what I'm seeing and hearing, they're being more intentional as far as go to market and trying to win some volume. So we'll see if that actually services.
Interesting. So, one thing you mentioned were costs, and well, I recently had on an episode Dr. Chris Kaplis of MIT, and he shared that he believes that we're going to in the next year or so switch over to being kind of it's been sort of a shipper's market in terms of carriers vying for business, and he thinks we're going to see a little bit of a shift back to carriers kind of having the upper role. Do you agree with that? Disagree with that? And if you do agree, or either way, how do you feel like shippers should respond?
I don't know that there's going to be a dramatic shift, say 180 degrees, I guess that's right,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to a strong shippers market, or excuse me,
Okay.
carriers market rather.
Yeah.
Um, eh, I mean, a few things have to happen. I think both, volume growth in the
Mm-hmm.
market, that it's really not there. I mean,
Yeah.
and the one of the few sources, and you kind of mentioned or alluded to this a little bit in the opening, is volume from Chinese retailers.
Yeah.
There's not much growth outside of that,
Mm-hmm.
and the only way that the market really kind of swings back the other way significantly is if capacity is taken out of the market, like significant amount.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that is part of the strategy from UPS.
Yeah.
And to an extent, FedEx as well. They're kind of right sizing their networks.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't see it happening that quickly to
Okay.
where now those carriers and presumably others are in a really strong position to start commanding much higher prices.
Yeah. So probably not, you're anticipating probably not 2025, maybe at some point, but we're still probably stick in a shipper's market. In doing so, what do you recommend to get, to really take advantage of that? So if we're still in a shipper's market, do you recommend locking in good rates for a lengthy time? Do you recommend the opposite, trying to get your rates being shifting all the time? How do you recommend they best take advantage cost wise?
I mean, one thing, it's somewhat dependent upon how, I mean, say in the last 12 to 18 months, what the approach has been for, a particular shipper. If they've been closely managing it and responding when things change either in the market uh, or within their own business, volume changes, things like that, then really it's continuing to stay on top of where if the volume if the market is growing, then they may start to actually need to look at it differently and potentially expect some rate increases. But if they haven't been negotiating, say, frequently or haven't bid their business in
Mm-hmm.
18 months or longer,
Yeah.
that is going to be my first recommendation, and that would be early in the year.
Okay.
And that's just to make sure that you have the best pricing that you can obtain with the right providers that meet your needs. And while I don't expect, I guess, the shippers market just to fade away really, really quickly, um, it's not going to be here forever.
Right.
And so
It's
being
always
able
cyclical.
to, exactly. So being able to get the best pricing that your volume commands really does need to happen early in the year, and
Okay.
then you can adjust thereafter. If
How early, Nate? We're talking January, February, just Q1 is good enough?
I would start as soon as you can.
Okay,
Which
start
would
now,
be
people. Start
January.
now. Okay.
I mean, ideally, you would have taken some time maybe in December to plan for January and then get it kicked off. But um, that just happens to be one of the projects from prior experience and now consulting that happens to get kind of pushed down the list if it
In the
doesn't get
middle of
started.
peak season, all of that
This is
gets
true.
crazy. So let's say they haven't, they forgot. They were busy. They were killing it in December. They had so many. That's what we're going to think. They were doing so good that they sort of forgot to plan. So do you recommend plan first and then, don't rush into it? I guess, what would be your strategy if they came to you and said, Nate, help me, consult me. Should I spend a few weeks planning, out what I want to do and then go bid?
Short answer just on that last part is yes. So to take, I mean, whatever time frame it takes you to really just assess the current state and of your agreements, your rates, contracts, but then also just if you don't already, set some very clear objectives with your program, be it both on cost and service. And since we're talking more about cost here, is setting those objectives and then deciding how to build out the plan to source the right carriers to meet those objectives. So take at least whatever time you need, hopefully just maybe a few weeks at the most. Uh, and if not, of course, there are other partners who can help, be it consultants. If you have a parcel spend management solution or partner in place, that can help expedite the process because you'll have the data available. So, but don't skip that step. Just make sure you're very intentional with it and don't let it linger too long before you get into the actual, say, RFP.
Yeah, perfect. So a couple of things in there kind of came to mind for me. So diversification, you mentioned at the beginning of the show that diversification of carriers might not be right for everyone. So I want you to kind of share when maybe you think it is right, or maybe on the flip side, when is diversification maybe not best, and kind of walk us through maybe then rate shopping, technology, those kind of things in terms of cost, what your recommendations are for shippers out there on that.
Diversification, I mean, it's something that I think, I just mentioned related to an RFP specifically of, setting objectives, but really just broadly with your overall parcel program is if you don't already have them, set, what cost targets you have or need to be, and also the service and, be it transit time, delivery reliability, delivery speed, those should all be established, and then look at it and see where the gaps are. If you're not meeting those objectives and can at least determine, if you aren't meeting the objectives, then the current providers have to be contributing to that in some way. And so that's where you can look for opportunities to find the right partner or partners to help close those gaps. But it should be specific. It shouldn't just be, diversifying isn't, I've been working with FedEx for 10 years, and every once in a while there's something that kind of pops up that they can't handle. So I'm just going to throw a regional carrier in there and give them 1% of my volume, done deal. Like, it's being more specific with what those objectives are. And if you go through that exercise and determine FedEx is meeting all my needs, then you don't need to diversify. But if you never go through the kind of assessment process, then you don't reach that answer. You just assume it's good enough.
Can you give an example maybe of when it would make sense to diversify? I don't know if it's a company or just even just generic.
One example might be if something changes with your volume profile. So a lot of the packages that you usually ship are not heavy, but heavier, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 pounds. And there's a new product line that, you release, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of volume that's under a pound. And so it's less than 1 pound. You're shipping packages that are in poly mailers that are 8 ounces that you haven't shipped before. And your partner is FedEx. Uh, just FedEx doesn't offer a service they used to, but they don't offer a service that has ounce-based pricing that's competitive. And so that's where it's something that you really are very well incentivized to go source another carrier, specifically just for that need, and that's, on a cost basis. Whether it's USPS, UPS Mail Innovations, DHL e-commerce, there are options, and that would be a pretty clear-cut example, I think, of almost it's not forced, but somewhat forced diversification.
Yeah, and I love that point that kind of a change occurred. I love how you said that because so often, maybe you're expanding internationally, maybe there are all kinds of little trigger points to watch for. You're opening up new DCs. You've got whatever it is, may mean that shifts are required, or at least probably should be looked at. So let's talk a little bit about the Chinese then. So we have been seeing, massive influx from Temu and Shein and all of these kind of low cost goods flowing in. There's been a little talk about, you've talked about a little bit expanding kind of the fulfillment capabilities here in the U.S. logistics. What are you seeing here? What do you feel like their entrance is meaning for everyone else in the industry here in the United States?
A lot has to do with whether, from a domestic standpoint, what impacts there will be likely from tariffs and or just trade regulation changes on the import side. And I don't think either or both of those are going to just completely, kill the inbound volume from China, but it might expedite or push more of that volume into domestic fulfillment for these companies. And I believe, could be wrong, but I believe Shein is ahead there. They've had fulfillment in the US for at least a year, probably two. And this all comes down to volume. The volume isn't going away, whether it's shipped domestically in the US or inbound from China or both. And I think that's going to continue to grow. And to an extent, I mean, it's really kind of propping up the US parcel market at this point.
Yeah.
And it's having impacts kind of across different groups, but just from the carrier side, alternative carriers, regionals, final mile carriers have really benefited from this volume. There are some actually that built their service offering almost entirely around it.
Really?
Uh, there are others who, have taken on a large portion of the volume and presumably have leveraged that to, provide some um, unit cost benefits because of the delivery density. So even though it's low revenue, because these companies, Temu and others, command very, very low rates,
Yes, I do.
um, it can enable, the delivery density a carrier gets allows them then to maybe offer competitive pricing to other retailers, still with margin,
Mm-hmm.
and they can take advantage of those kind of economies of scale. Uh, then we've seen, publicly at least, because it comes up on earnings calls for FedEx and UPS. FedEx has at least stated they don't have, I don't know what the verbiage was they used, a significant, say, commitment or investment in that volume.
Okay.
UPS, however, uh, I think I would still say that they do, and they did have more, and it kind of blew up in their face in, after Q2 earnings because it was one of the reasons why the earnings weren't as strong. I think they've since made some changes, and so they've pulled back from that or kind of rationalized that a little bit and aren't as deep into that volume at such a low price as they were, say, 6 months ago.
So, Nate, for our carrier audience who's watching, um, what are your recommendations for working with Temu, Shein, these other, really low rate organizations? Is it a risk? Is it? I know that de minimis is a big debate right now going on in Congress in import fees, trying to kind of slow some of that down coming from China. Um, I guess, yeah. So, what is your recommendation to carriers? Work with them? Is it too risky? There's a lot of volume, but just what would you say?
It's very situational. I'll just kind of preface with saying that. So I can't make a blanket
You're getting
recommendation,
us the political answer. I love it.
right?
I
Hold
love
on,
it. We
I'll
got to
get there.
do
But
it.
because I'll just say, carriers know their own cost structures better than I do,
Yeah.
and so this is pretty obvious. But of not being, too dependent on that volume for a significant amount of percentage, I guess, of
Mm-hmm.
the company revenue. I mean, that's what I would say
Yes.
because
Yes.
it's actually, while there's risk on the regulatory side, there's actually just as much risk, or probably even more, of just from what I've been told, of how some of these companies manage their volume with these providers and will flip volume from one carrier to another to save a pretty small amount, but to save on cost.
Yes. When your
So,
costs are so low, I mean,
right.
every penny is making a huge difference.
Yes. And so that's the thing where it's difficult to rely on that volume and revenue indefinitely because it may change very quickly. So I would say, uh, you know, test and learn. So
Yes.
kind of take on a certain part of it that wouldn't cause issues if you lost it 2 months from now, and see if it's worth building out in areas that actually benefit your network.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, Nate, we are already, I don't even know how, we're already at time. Um, you have so much that I just feel like I could stay here all day and learn from you. But any other final advice? We've talked costs and carriers, diversification. Any final recommendation for shippers specifically first going into 2025? Final thoughts that you recommend that they make sure they lock down. Great advice on, getting your RFP going early on, making sure you're looking for those trigger points of change. If anything happens, to know if you need to diversify. Any other final thoughts that you have?
It's kind of a theme with some of the things we've talked about, but just prioritize parcel. I'm a bit uh, biased here, but uh, Parcel kind of gets the short end of the stick within supply chain, and even though it ends up being, particularly for retailers, a very, very large, expense budget line item, it just doesn't get the priority perhaps than it should. And so I would just encourage, shippers to prioritize parcel, invest in people and partners. And so from a partner standpoint, whether that is on delivery partners, um, shipping technology, multi-carrier shipping technology, or parcel spend management, those partners, that should be a very clear and intentional investment. And then people, there's not a lot of people who really have a lot of parcel expertise or experience, but it should be something that many shippers, I think, intentionally can invest in their people to actually devote, be it a person, start with one, to parcel. I think the payback would be pretty quick.
Okay. I love that you said that in multiple reasons. There's multiple things there that you said that just related to me. First, parcel. I feel like, parcel has boomed recently in terms of e-commerce exploding, but it has not gotten the attention, and we have not yet seen that investment from our shippers in recognizing that. So I think you are spot on that. You and I are so in agreement on that. And I love how you said around people, start with one. I think so often people think it's like, okay, I'm going to dive in and do this giant thing. Just start small and grow from there. So that's brilliant. Love that, Nate. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So appreciate it. I know our audience is going to want to connect with you, reach out to you. What is the best way to connect with you? And obviously, a great person, if you want help, is Nate Skiver. So where can people reach out and connect with you?
Well, one way you mentioned it early on, I think, is LinkedIn. So
Mm-hmm.
follow me on LinkedIn, DM me on LinkedIn. That's I'm very, very active there.
Yeah.
Post content every day.
He'll
Also,
get you thinking there. He'll
well,
get you thinking.
that's part of the reason I do it,
Yeah.
to really create some engagement. But
Mm-hmm.
then also email Nate at lpfspendmanagement.com,
Perfect.
and there's more information about my consulting services at lpfspendmanagement.com.
Fantastic. Well, for all of you in the audience, wish you the best 2025. It's going to be an awesome year. Crazy. This industry is always crazy, though. So expect the unexpected. Nate, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori.
And we'll see you next time.